This is South Korea, a place that paradoxically is one of the richest, but also one of the unhappiest countries in the world. This is especially true if you're a young student facing extreme societal pressure to go to a top university, or a fresh graduate looking for a well-paying job that unfortunately just didn't exist. You see, South Korea has the highest suicide rates out of all developed countries with an extremely large gap. 40% of young unemployed Koreans have been jobless since 2020, and most of them have already given up. 57.5% of people aged 19 to 34 are still living with their parents, and the biggest reason cited for this are unemployment or some sort of financial issues. Because finding a job is so hard and stressful, the health ministry said that at least 5% of the entire South Korean population had once tried to physically or psychologically isolate themselves, like cutting off all social relations and not leaving home for months. After all, who wants to be friends or hang out with someone who doesn't have a job? Unfortunately, most people think this way. Meanwhile, about 25% of all South Koreans have experienced some sort of mental illness, facing high levels of stress, along with symptoms of anxiety or depression in Korea's young people. But why did this happen? How is it that a country so economically successful can be so unhappy and depressing? Well, because beneath the glinting lights and the apparent economic success of South Korea, there exists a deep-rooted economic and cultural issue that caused all of this anxiety, depression, and deaths among Korea's younger population. Today, we're going to explore this extremely sad problem. So, what are the underlying issues behind South Korea's youth unemployment? How did these issues contribute to the country's concerning trend of growing mental health problems? Alright, so what if I tell you that the only way for you to succeed in life is to study hard, get a degree from a top university, and find a 9-to-5 job at a large corporation where you will work until you eventually retire? In the USA and many European countries, this sounds like a cliche, something that your parents told you but just isn't true in the 21st century. But in South Korea, what I said before sums up the dream life of many teenagers and young adults. I know many of you watching probably disagree with this, but in South Korea, most people think that getting a good job from a large company is pretty much the only way to be successful in life. And they're right. This stems from massive issues hidden beneath South Korea's economic success. And when I say these issues are hidden, I really meant it. You see, South Korea is a country famous for its emphasis, or dare I say, borderline obsession with college education. More than 80% of teenagers plan to obtain at least a 4-year university degree, and 90% of parents share that ambition. The government data supports this. If you look at this chart here, around 75% of high school graduates do enter college. Also, South Korea has the highest percentage of university graduates among OECD countries. 70% of people between the ages of 25 to 34 had some sort of college education, more than in the UK, Canada, Australia, and the USA. On the surface level, this shows that the South Korean education system is the best in the world at producing good, educated workers. But still, if many of these college graduates couldn't find a job after spending so much of their or their parents' money on education, then what's the point? This became even weirder when we account that there are actually many South Korean businesses that cannot find employees to work for them. In November 2022, the Korea Federation of SMEs conducted a survey on 1,000 manufacturing companies that mostly employed non-Korean workers. When asked about the reason why, 90% of companies said that it is very difficult to find local workers who want to work for them. The reason behind this strange phenomenon is that South Korea had an extreme case of what economists call labor market segmentation. It is when the economy is essentially divided into two parts. The first part is the primary sector, the sector that is responsible for a large part of the economic output in the country. Here, companies pay high wages, have good working conditions for workers, have job stability, and employees have a clear career path with a good chance of climbing the corporate ladder. The secondary sector, meanwhile, is exactly the opposite. Here, companies pay low wages, mostly hire temporary or part-time workers to avoid paying social insurance, working conditions are poor, employee turnovers are high as employees often come and leave, and there's little to no chance of career advancement. Basically, if you've ever worked in this kind of company, you're most likely to be stuck there for the rest of your life. In South Korea's case, the primary sector consists of pretty much the biggest and most successful companies with power over the government. Think Samsung, LG, Lotte, Hyundai, who all are part of the conglomerate that contributed massively to South Korea's economic success. Meanwhile, the secondary sector is the textile workers, mining workers, and construction workers, which are mostly filled with immigrants from China, North Korea, or other Asian countries like Indonesia or the Philippines. Now, if you think about it, this is a phenomenon that exists in pretty much all countries on Earth, even in the richest countries. In the USA, for example, immigrants and ethnic minorities often take up necessary but unglamorous jobs like mining workers, retail workers, or food processing factory workers. In this study from Pew Research, 77% of Americans said that immigrants mostly fill jobs that they don't want. But in South Korea, this problem went up to 11. The stigma that people have on these kinds of jobs is extremely strong. And it doesn't help that these jobs are filled with foreigners, many of whom are people who escaped from North Korea. Sure, there are native South Koreans who work in the secondary sector, but most of them are middle or high school graduates who don't have enough money to enter college. Oftentimes, people will just avoid these kinds of jobs altogether. It essentially forces young people, especially those with a college education, to apply to big companies and big companies only, to the point that it is better to be unemployed rather than work in the secondary sector, with low wages and precarious working conditions, especially when squeezed with high cost of living. To quote a 32-year-old South Korean woman who herself works 2 jobs, in South Korea these days, if you want to survive on a monthly salary, it has to be with a large corporation or you must be in specific jobs. This is where the segmentation of the labor market can best be seen. Companies like Samsung and Hyundai are awash with CVs and job applicants, and competition for jobs is extremely tough. Meanwhile, many other companies cannot find workers to work for them. If you look at this chart, a government survey conducted in 2021 found that around 70% of young adults want to work in a large company, a publicly traded company, or some sort of government agency. About 14% of them want to be self-employed, and there's only 4% of young people who do want to work in small and medium enterprises. Sure, South Korea has a lot of jobs, but it severely lacks attractive jobs. And that's the biggest and the most fundamental problem behind South Korea's youth unemployment. The competition for these so-called attractive jobs is astonishing. When a college graduate in South Korea gets rejected from a large company, chances are they will apply again and again until one of those large companies accepts them. If they still get rejected after a few attempts, well then, study more, get a foreign language certification, maybe get another degree, or even do plastic surgery. After all, in an ultra-competitive job environment, having good looks could be a real advantage. This so-called employment surgery is pretty common in South Korea. And this is where the second problem comes in. You see, according to a former Minister of Education, South Korea experiences what he calls an education bubble. To put it simply, Companies over-rely on academic qualifications to measure someone's intelligence or ability to perform in a particular job. If you want to find work, you have to have the best degree possible from the best universities possible, to the point that internships, job experiences, or even your actual skills are second compared to your degree. In 2015, 44.5% of university graduates and 78.5% of postgraduate degree holders reported that they were overqualified for their job. This credentialism is deeply rooted in the Korean society, and it reinforces the belief that a degree from a top university is everything. Because if you want to get good jobs, it really is everything. In South Korea, there are many cases where a student will focus on attending the most prestigious university or program, rather than finding a program that they're actually interested in or talented in. The main problem behind South Korea's youth unemployment and its ultra-competitive job environment are 1. The lack of a stable, financially attractive jobs, and 2. The over-reliance on companies on academic qualifications, specifically college education. Now, so far, we have talked about the economic issues, things like labor market dualism and South Korea's competitive job environment. But how do these issues impact the people's lives? Well, as you can already guess, living in a world where your dream life consists of studying hard to get to a top university, applying for a job in an ultra-competitive environment, and then working at a company until you retire is a pretty stressful life. It doesn't help that top universities can only accommodate so many students, and the same can be said for large companies. They can only hire so much before running out of space. As a growing number of South Korean youths fails to find a job, there are more and more people who try to isolate themselves in their homes, only going out whenever necessary and avoiding meeting people as much as possible. This is called hikikomori, and it's a phenomenon that has been picking up trends since the pandemic, especially in Japan and South Korea. The other day I read this article from Wired, and it tells the story of a young South Korean man who rushed out of his home to buy necessities after isolating himself for months. At that point, he hadn't showered for weeks, his hair was unkempt, and he smelled badly. But he was running out of basic essentials like ramen and cigarettes. So, he rushes outside and tries his best to avoid being seen by other people. After picking up his supplies, he was approaching the front entrance of his apartment, but he forgot the passcode to open the door as it had been so long since he'd gone outside. And then, he suffered a panic attack right in front of the door. Typically, people who suffer from hikikomori are young adults, mostly men in their teens, 20s, and 30s. Because hiding from the public is their very motive, it's hard to know exactly how many there are in South Korea, but the government estimates around 350,000 people. However, it is likely to be more since most of these cases are unreported. People who suffer from hikikomori are far less likely to go out and hang out with friends, find a spouse, and have children. Who wants to hang out or network with unemployed people? Who wants to marry someone who can't even find a job? How do you try to raise a kid without a job? This is what a lot of South Korea's youths ask themselves when they want to hang out with their friends or find love. This actually worsens another one of South Korea's economic issues, its low birth rate. But that's a topic for another video. Now, this extreme societal pressure for people to perform isn't just burden on job seekers. In many ways, the pressure put on teenagers is arguably worse. Because the competition of applying to a top university is just as fierce as getting accepted at a large company, students are often forced to study long hours at school and then take up late-night classes at a private educational institutions called hagwon. In an OECD study in 2015, South Korean 15-year-olds had the longest hours spent studying more than any other country. Coincidentally, they also had the lowest life satisfaction than any other country. To give you another perspective of just how stressful the lives of South Korean students are, South Korea is the only country where working adults actually have more free time than teenagers. By the way, these hagwons or private educational institutions also put a significant burden on the students' families as well, because these private classes are oftentimes very expensive. However, not attending these classes meant that their child would be disadvantaged for the university entrance exam. So, they have to do it in the hope that their child can enter a top university and eventually get a good job at a large company. It is because of these facts that the stress of finding a job and carving a future for yourself extends to far more than just fresh graduates. These days, even middle school and high school graduates are put under extreme pressure to enter the best universities, because if you're not, you're already a failure at 15 years old. This has resulted in a large number of students with mental health issues, as well as a large number of teenage suicide cases in South Korea. This is Doverhill, and see you next time.